You're listening to Your Next Episode. Welcome back. I'm Amy. And listen, you didn't think you were going to get away with listening to this episode without me reminding you about our live gig that we're doing on Thursday the 17th of June. Go to darkhorsedigital.co.uk and you can actually reserve your tickets to either watch it streamed live into Facebook, and it's going to be amazing with comedians with actual legs walking around a stage. It's going to be me, your girl. You know me. Whether I fail or whether I thrive, it will be. It's just going to be great. It will be worth a watch. We can all like cringe later after it. But we've got Jem Brister, who is an amazing comedian. We've got Clinton Baptiste, who was in Phoenix Nights, and a friend of the podcast, Rich Wilson, emceeing the whole thing. So go and get your tickets now. Thursday, the 17th of June. Just trying to think. We'll put the link to the show notes and come along and enjoy.
Yeah, meet us there.
So you can get your tickets to either be there if you're in Kent or to have it live streamed into your smartphone. Go to darkhorsedigital.co.uk, drop your email address in there, and the rest will magically happen. So today we are discussing breakups, aren't we, Louise?
Yep, we are. Absolutely.
The good, the bad, the conscious uncoupling. Do you remember that?
Yes.
We've just had a really good old chat with Rosie Wilby. Rosie is a stand-up comic, a podcaster and an author, and in her latest book, The Breakup Monologues, she examines through her own experiences and stories from other people and also experts. She examines the topic of what we can learn from our breakups, you know, why they are vital parts of our personal growth and actually badges to be worn with pride rather than shame eventually. I think that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah. And, you know, breaking up a relationship of any kind rarely happens without desperate heartache. And the emotions involved can be very complex, as we've discussed with Rosie. And, you know, in her podcast, also called The Breakup Monologues, Rosie harnesses the power of sharing stories, as she does in the book. And our conversation obviously involves a bit of oversharing from Amy.
Standard.
So here's our conversation with Rosie Wilby.
So, Rosie, you're described as the self-styled lesbian Louis Theroux, which I love. And the book is a mixture of memoir and investigation. Your own experiences, your relationship with your girlfriend is put under the microscope. And there's friend stories and also expert input from relationship therapists and scientists and sociologists. So tell us about the Breakup Monologues. How did it come about and how do you get dubbed the Queen of Breakups on Radio 4?
It's quite an accolade, isn't it? I mean, if you become the queen of breakups, does it mean you're just really bad at relationships? I'm not sure. But what happened was 10 years ago now, I got dumped by email. Ooh. And I always joke on stage that I did feel much better once I'd corrected her spelling and punctuation.
Yeah, good.
Of course, and changed the font, actually, yes.
Oh, I love the petty reaction to that. That's brilliant.
It was a traumatic experience, as breakups often are. So it set me off on a course of writing a trilogy of comedy shows that I toured around the world, which were investigating the psychology of love and relationships. And whilst they were comedy shows, they were also quite sciencey and had a lot of real information in there, and my own exploration and journey into better understanding how I might have healthier and better relationships, communicate better with partners in the future. And so the final part of that trilogy was all about breakups, and that led me to go and do my podcast, The Breakup Monologues, and then turn that podcast into a book, which has a few of the funniest moments from the podcast and most interesting moments, but is largely, as you say, my own story now of trying to stay in a relationship with my partner.
Who's just referred to as the girlfriend all the way through. I don't think we ever get her. Can you not tell us her name? No.
I can, indeed. She's called Suze. Okay. It's just actually in the book, I thought it was fun to just call her girlfriend. Yeah. I mean, you've given her an extra
No, not there. You're right. Just girlfriend. Yeah.
She's just girlfriend. Just girlfriend. Yeah, so it's very much a book that's as much about staying together as it is about breaking up, because I think those two things are quite intertwined, because I think we actually learn from our breakups how we might stay in our future relationships and indeed choose better partners that we actually want to stay with.
Yeah.
But you're right, Radio 4 did call me the Queen of Breakups when I appeared on Saturday Live, which was quite fun. I thought I should get a little crown, but they didn't have one.
Oh, well, that's disappointing. But so can we just go through? You cite in the book 7 main reasons for breakups that your friend, a therapist, came up with. And they were. I'll just go through them quickly. So, sexual problems, including mismatched libidos and affairs, incompatibility around money, domestic issues arising from living together, drug and alcohol addiction, untreated mental health conditions, abuse, and conflicts over autonomy and intimacy. And I sat and thought about breakups that I've had and just thought, I would agree with that list of 7. But also, it does strike me that the initial choosing of a partner is a really complex thing, and that's going to ultimately impact on whether or not people split up. So, that sort of early attraction to someone and the analysing of their character and the decision to pair up, all of that's going to be influenced on our own experiences and relationships in life so far. So with our parents, with our friends, watching how other people's relationships play out. And it just got me thinking. So I have a friend whose dad shagged around a lot when she was younger. He was like enormous fun, but totally selfish, and no woman ever held his loyalty. And this friend now, basically, she makes one disastrous choice after another when it comes to men. And I've noticed that any bloke who's nice to her or treats her with respect, she kind of views them as a bit boring. And she always dumps the nice ones. And she's attracted to the bastards who always dump her in one way or another. So what does that fall under? Does that fall loosely under like the mental health aspect? There are women, and men who do that. What do those people need to do? Do they just need therapy or?
Well, actually, we joke, don't we? Yeah, but probably yes. I have had therapy before I got. I didn't have therapy for very long because she was frightfully expensive, but she was very good. I did have therapy before I got into what coincidentally happens to be the healthiest relationship I've ever had. So, I think it can help us to communicate in relationships, articulate our boundaries, and understand who we are and what we want and what we need. Yeah. And I think a good therapist can help you. A bad therapist, maybe not so much, but there are some too. So choosing a therapist is actually just as complex as choosing a partner. But I think you're right that many of us repeat unhealthy patterns, and we are drawn to some kind of narrative that we're trying to fix something in our past. We're often drawn to familiar pain and sadly abuse. In my community, I'm a gay woman, and I see lots of women who are drawn to really crappy women who are going to treat them badly. So it's not just in the heteronormative heterosexual world as well. Unfortunately, sometimes if we've had bad experiences, we are sort of, like you say, bored by those comfortable kind of experiences. And I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's this conflict between our that sexual chemistry and the more enduring compatibility, which are almost two different types of love and attraction. And I really I was wrestling with these two two ideas and how they can often be at odds in my first book, which was all about monogamy. And because I was in a relationship where I got on well with my partner, and I have stayed friends with my partner, because lesbians often do, because it's a small community and sometimes there's no one else to be friends with. But we had, a lovely relationship and sort of enjoyed living together. But I think our sexual chemistry was a bit off, partly because it had been the wrong time when I met her. I was still grieving over my past breakup and hadn't processed it or understood it, because I didn't have the information that I needed about what had happened. So I wasn't in the right space to make that sexual connection with her. And so that was the part that was a bit off in our relationship. So I was really on this kind of quest at that stage in my life to address whether, you could sort of outsource that bit of your relationship if your partnership was really good in every other way, and could you have an open relationship? I mean, my ventures with that were not very successful. I went to a lesbian sauna night thinking it was going to be a hedonistic orgy, but we all just ended up tidying up and folding towels. Because women don't seem to work in the same way. I'm no good at casual sex. I'm rubbish at it. I actually really need a connection with somebody.
Same here. Yeah.
But I kind of feel frustrated. I feel frustrated, because I think of male friends of mine, straight and gay, who, they can remove sex from love sometimes and separate those two things a bit more. I think, generally speaking, and it is obviously a bit of a generalisation, I think women seem to find that more difficult, and it is very complex.
Well, I think it's the fantasy thing, isn't it? It's like the idea of that. It sounds really horny and like, oh yeah, but then when it actually comes to it and the execution of it, I mean, I'm kind of like, oh, actually, I would rather tidy up, get these countertops nice and clean.
It's very satisfying, isn't it?
maybe I'm just I'm not looking for the opportunities in the right areas. So I love the subtitle of your book, The Unexpected Joy of Heartbreak, and I think for anyone who's listening to this and who's broken up with someone and they're still madly in love with them, and it's going to be tricky to get your head around that, and I guess it's all a matter of timing and processing. But do you think you could distill sort of how on earth a breakup can bring unexpected joy eventually?
Yeah, I really do think eventually there can be a good side to breakups. I think there's a positive energy that can be harnessed for good and sort of repurposed as this force for good, rather than this kind of rage and pain that can drive us to destructive acts of revenge. For example, in the Museum of Broken Relationships in Zagreb, one of the exhibits is the axe that a woman from Berlin used to chop up her lover's furniture.
Oh, just their furniture. I'd probably take it a bit
well,
further.
yes, you would
go for limbs,
chop up
wouldn't
her
you?
axe.
I would, yeah.
But yeah, no, I think it can be, once you've got through the very difficult grieving and sadness and painful stage, it can be this really transformative time. I know women who have suddenly become triathletes. They've launched an amazing business. I started comedy after a breakup, and I've done other interesting projects in between relationships when I've been in that single space where you're suddenly your own project and you have time, you have headspace. And often when we're in a couple, even if we're really happy in that relationship, we sometimes limit ourselves because we are in that sort of coziness, that domestic bubble, and we don't always push ourselves and challenge ourselves in the same way that we might do when we're sort of facing the storms of self-reflection.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we had, funnily enough, Helen Thorne from Scummy Mummies was on the podcast earlier this year, and she talked about becoming single, which happened just after lockdown last March, and she was talking about the sort of a real empowerment of realising, that other people fancied her. She just found that fantastic. But also, she's brought out a book. She's just, what you just said there, she immediately just springs to mind.
I mean, she makes divorce look tempting for me at this point. I've got stuff to do, Rosie. I've got things that it's my marriage that's holding me back.
Absolutely.
I know, yeah. I mean, absolutely. Helen is very inspiring, isn't she? I've interviewed her on my podcast as well.
Yeah.
But she absolutely encompasses that what I call breakup energy, that kind of vibrancy that we feel, like when you've come out of a relationship, you sort of find yourself going to the shop for a pint of milk, but just thinking, I wonder if I'll meet anyone.
Yeah,
suddenly there are possibilities, aren't there? Whereas when you're in a relationship, those possibilities aren't there because you've committed to somebody and you're going to be faithful to them, and you can't, you're not going to get off with somebody in the local shop. I mean, you're probably not going to anyway, but the possibility is there, isn't it?
Absolutely. Anticipation, isn't it? Yeah. So I guess what you're saying is that once you have licked your wounds, you sat in the shower tray crying. Once you process that, then there's some light at the end of the tunnel. And I love the idea of somebody listening to this driving along now who is in the because it is so painful, isn't it? I mean, we're joking about it now, but it's it's like the shame, you're humiliated, your heart's broken, your pride is a bit bruised, but actually there's life after a relationship and after heartbreak, isn't there?
Oh God, there so is. And there've actually been studies that have been done that show people actually reporting that they felt they had grown and developed and learned and actually were able now to make better partner choices going forwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the book, it's not just breakups from romantic relationships that you examine. You address the breakup of friendships, of professional relationships, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But with all of them, there's a grief process, isn't there? And feelings that are similar to when someone dies. And I think you talked about the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross grief stages, the shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But I know they're not necessarily in that order. But the anger stage, I'm pretty sure if Paul left me, I would cling to unforgiveness and rage, and I would be clearing out the bank account, burning his possessions. I'd be attempting to turn our children against him. It would be ugly.
You'd end up in that museum.
I would end up in that museum. That's why I was like, what? There's a museum for it would be really ugly and deeply unhealthy for everyone. I mean, we've been together for over 30 years, but I sometimes wonder if he's too terrified to leave because he knows what I'm like. But hell hath no fury. That phrase, that would be me. That would be personified by me. So the ultimate aim is to arrive at acceptance and then move on, isn't it? And how do people achieve that, or is it just there's no answer and you just have to go through backwards and forwards through those stages?
Well, I think to some extent you do, because it's I don't think the stages necessarily work in order or to a particular timeline for everybody. I think we're all different, and recovery from something like this is very individual, and particularly because it's likely to trigger other traumas and other events, other memories. So sometimes you're not actually grieving the breakup itself. Maybe if you've had a short fling and you kind of think, God, why do I feel so awful? I only knew this person for a couple of weeks. But sometimes it's triggered something really terrible from your childhood. I mean, I talk about in the book about this woman who I had a couple of dates with, and it really did kind of bring up all this stuff for me about being bullied at school and kind of feeling excluded and sort of feeling not in the same kind of privileged position and not having the same status as somebody, and it had echoes of all these uncomfortable things for me. So I think we have to be careful when we think there's some kind of script. But that said, there are lots of things that will help, like spending time with your friends and talking things through with them. Even eating chocolate can help, which is nice, isn't it?
Especially. Rosie, that is so perceptive of you to know that those few dates had triggered that. Like, how have you become so evolved? Is it you've had a good therapist, or have you got a background in sort of psychology? Because to connect those dots is amazing.
I think actually writing about all this stuff, I think writing a book, doing a podcast, it makes you think more deeply about what you're investigating, and a lot of why you're investigating breakups, even though you might try to do it as broadly as possible, include lots of other different people's stories. You're actually trying to get to the bottom of your own questions about what is going on for you, and you're trying to do that in a way that is interesting for other people to read about, because you're trying to come up with answers that might help other people too. But I think when we can connect the dots between different experiences, we can understand why they are causing us pain. And hopefully try and
that would help you move on a bit from that anger, wouldn't it? You know,
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Just putting it all on that person, if you sort of understand why am I feeling like this? I
mean, we all bring our own shit to every transaction that we have, like you were saying before, whether that is romantic or professional or platonic.
Or the podcast. You know, I always make it about me. Always.
Well, I mean, that's just something we've all had to bend over and take, Louise, quite frankly. Okay, we're going to move on now to ghosting. And I just want to tell you my ghosting story.
Great.
Rosie.
Yes.
So basically,
likes to overshare.
Oh, yeah. Can we get the overshare jingle?
Yeah.
So I was probably about sort of early 20s, living up north. Started seeing this guy. Talk about that thing you just said before has triggered me, because I'm kind of like, he was just gorgeous, and you know when you feel a bit like, I'm not worthy, and he'd been to I had a little flat in Manchester at the time, so he'd been over to mine. I was never invited to him. I'd never gone to him. You see how I'm already connecting dots that probably aren't that. I think he probably had a family. I don't know. But he was a lot older than me. He was probably in his late 30s. Even that, I'm kind of like, a bit dodgy. Anyway, so we'd been seeing each other, like I guess shagging, going out, whatever, nights out, whatever, like you do, for maybe 4, 5, 6 months. It got to sort of New Year's Eve. So we had these plans to come down. We're going to come down to London, but he said, meet me in London. So meet me in London, get the train down, and I'll meet you at King's Cross. So I got 3 of my friends. This was in the days, Rosie, when we were having a silk cart on the train. Not even in the smoking carriage. We're actually having a silk cart, on the train. And we got there.
I used to have those extra light silk cuts because I was rubbish at smoking as a student. But I wanted to try and join in. I might as well have had one of those sweetie ones that was like just a sugar.
With the talcum powder coming out.
Yes.
So we arrived at King's Cross, and with my two friends, so there's 3 of us, and we're all dolled up, and obviously all the arrangements had been made where we're going, but we got there and he just didn't fucking show up. He didn't show up, and oh my God, and I just never heard from him again. And even now I'm thinking, there is a part of me even now that's thinking, okay, my last name has changed because I'm now married. I know he's listening to this, and I know that he'd be like, oh Amy, I feel so bad about that. I feel really bad about the way that went down. So that's narrowing it down. But
that's a shitty thing to do, isn't
awful,
it? Ghosting
awful.
someone.
And so but that was before ghosting was like, I guess it was sort of pre, I think maybe I had a pager or a BlackBerry or a Palm Pilot at the time. It was before GPS or Find Your Friend, and I was
had a fax machine.
The telegram. The telegram just never arrived. God, I'm so old. But yeah, I was embarrassed because I was with my friends, and it was New Year, so it was just. But this happens all the time, I guess, doesn't it? And I guess it's a shitty thing to do. Obviously, he was a complete coward, but people do that every day. how traumatized am I on a scale of 1 to 10 to be sitting here 20 years later talking about it? Do you think that lack of closure?
Still sounds raw, doesn't it? What do you think?
Yes, it does. But it is. It's lack of closure, is it?
It's that ambiguous loss, isn't it?
It really is. That's the thing. You're left wondering what on earth happened. And I think not having the information is really, really annoying, particularly if you're one of the kind of people like I am who needs to understand things. I've got quite a scientific mind, I think. So it's really helped me to understand some of the psychology of love and why breakups feel so terrible, because we feel like we're withdrawing from a drug. And I think it helps to understand these kinds of things. But when somebody doesn't give you the information, it's like, oh, what happened? It's so weird, isn't it? I mean, I would just try and tell myself that person, they clearly are dead. I mean,
there was someone in your book, though, that he'd gone to prison.
Oh, that was
he was
funny.
ghosting her. He'd gone to prison.
She'd been ghosted.
Yeah. I mean, and I suppose, how do you deal with it then? If you've been ghosted, you're going to have that grief process. There's going to be a delay to it, isn't there? And
there's going to be a confusion, because you're left with some kind of hope that they are going to pop up again. And the most cruel thing about the sort of modern forms of ghosting in the digital world is that there are now these kind of spin-offs of ghosting, like submarining, it's called.
What is that?
Where you do ghost someone, but then you pop up again.
Oh my
and then
God.
you go away again. So that's awful.
God, but to be doing that, there's got to be something not right.
Oh, something wrong with you.
Yeah.
But the other one is Marleying. So as in the ghost of Marley, and that's where you pop up again at Christmas. To have a Christmas fling.
No way! Oh my God! Oh my God!
Just if you're just a bit bored for the festive season.
Yeah. Jeez. I mean, oh dear, they're horrible people. Yeah.
Have you ever been ghosted?
It's a shame,
Rosie?
isn't it?
Have you ever been ghosted?
I been ghosted? No, I don't think I have. No, I've not been ghosted. But for me, being dumped by email 10 years ago, and I think that shows how things have moved on, because then that seemed really, after a 5-year relationship, it seemed quite abrupt. Like I'm quite old school. I was still expecting a heart to heart, a kind of, I don't know, some terrible teary meeting in a Starbucks, but I don't know if that can always necessarily be that helpful anyway. But just an email seemed quite difficult, because I think my control had been taken away. It didn't feel like it was a negotiation. It was someone had made a decision. And I think that is what's really hard. There's actually a lovely episode of my podcast where I talked to Jessica Foster-Q, and she talks about how when she was breaking up with the father of her child, she said, conversation has to be, I am breaking up with you, that's not up for discussion, but the way we do it, how we move forwards, how we co-parent, all of that is, and the kind of pace at which we do all this is absolutely up for discussion.
Yeah.
And I think you've got to give somebody some kind of agency, otherwise they just feel like they're sort of nothing, they're very insignificant. And that, I think, is almost the hardest part of the whole process, is feeling that you're somehow invisible. So somebody, if your ex, even if they're the one to sort of make the decision, if they can give you some kind of power and control, I think it helps if you've got some kind of control over part of how the process goes.
Yeah.
I guess it's if you want to end a relationship, it is kind of untangling it with the most grace and the most kindness and compassion that you can, isn't it?
Yeah, sometimes it's hard though, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I used to, after I got dumped by email, I've not shared this anywhere actually, what a psychopath, I had a photo of her on a breadboard which I would stab every morning.
Excellent.
So wait a minute, let's just unpack this. Did you get the breadboard with her face on it after you'd split up, or was it like a novelty Christmas present?
No, it wasn't. I mean, I blue tacked it to a bread board.
right.
It wasn't like a novelty thing I specially paid to create.
Right, I thought, you can get those bread balls that are sort of bespoke and customised and personalised. Right, okay, so it was...
This was a very lo-fi version of such a thing. I mean, if I was going to buy something, I suppose a dartboard.
Yes. Yeah.
It's the gluten version of the dartboard, isn't it? It's funny. So let's talk about friendships. You've chatted with Kate Lever, who wrote The Friendship Cure, about friendship breakups, and this is another one. It's kind of I know, Louise, you pride yourself, don't you, Louise, on having a group of friends that you've had for many years.
But I have been dumped once by, and it was 10 years ago, and
she's still smart.
She ghosted me as well. But it wasn't just me. It was like a little group of us. But we'd known each other since primary school, and she just and that was, it was so traumatic that I just, when I realised it was happening, and I think it took me months I was like, that's funny. She's not replying. Like, we were best friends.
She's just not getting.
Still don't know what the fuck I did. Yeah. No. Well, I think she had stuff going on. Yeah, I'm going to obviously blame. I mean, it can't have been me.
No.
But it just, it felt like a death, and very personal, to the point where I said to Paul at one point, I said, right, if I die at any point, you make sure that bitch doesn't rock up at my funeral, because I don't want her turning up because she wants to be seen to be. I said I want her very much cast aside. I want that coming from my grave, really bitter, nasty.
At this point, Rosie, you'd wonder why anyone didn't want to be friends with Louise.
You can't imagine.
Yeah, who hurt you? I'm joking. So what came of your discussions with Kate Lever? It can be
exactly.
Sorry, go on.
Exactly as you're saying, really. It's almost more personal, and I think people had an even harder time talking about friendship breakups because we don't really have the same script for grieving them. We don't really have the same songs and films and breakup kind of. Yeah, like I say, there's scripts that we follow. So it was so interesting to talk to Kate. She's fantastic.
I've seen her speak. She came to our WI in Tunbridge Wells, which sounds terrible, but it's a really, really cool WI. I mean, honestly, it is the coolest in Britain. And she came to talk to us once, and that was really interesting. Yeah, but I think, as you say, there's no format for grieving in the same way as a romantic breakup, is there? So. But it can feel, really, as I say, obviously, it's been 10 years from my friend, and I'm still furious. So,
do you know, it's funny because I'm
still stuck at anger.
I've got quite a few sort of friendship bones in the graveyard of when I look back. I'm kind of like, God, the one common factor is me.
Oh.
Do you know what I mean? I'm not a great communicator, right? Like, even at the age of 43, but if I look back on the past sort of 2-3 decades, I just maybe it all does come down to sort of communication at the end of the day, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So let's just think again about romantic relationships. So we all know. I think we all know and we understand it's like absolutely impossible to maintain that exciting, passionate, oxytocin-fueled first stage of a relationship because, I mean, we'd die of exhaustion for a start, but also life's mundanity kicks in eventually. What is the key to staying together then for, once all that dies down?
I mean, I think I'm really careful in the book to kind of display the ups and downs of my relationship in quite a humdrum, everyday way, and those kind of petty annoyances, and show that it really does require patience actually to keep a relationship going, and particularly when you're two midlife women in a relationship. And I think there's one chapter, Hormonal Hell, where I talk about the sort of Russian roulette of being in a lesbian relationship in your 40s, and how it's kind of just as important to check your partner's hormonal cycle in the diary as it is your own, so you know where she's at, what mood she's going to be on any particular day, so that there's a chapter set on this very cramped boat where we have this little holiday on a boat, and we're both due on, and tempers fray every time we get to one of the locks.
Oh, God.
Like dead calm, Rosie.
Yes, just like that.
Paul has. I don't have a period app, but Paul, my husband, who also is the technical guy here. He has a period app. I don't know which one it is he's got, but he's got it, and he tracks my period so that he knows
when to avoid you.
When to just let things slide. When I'm being completely unreasonable and perhaps a bit spiky, and and he just knows, like, okay, don't pull her up on that. Don't start a row because it's that sort of time. So I think obviously worth keeping an eye on.
I love that. I mean, we're all sort of living much longer now than our ancestors ever did. Is it actually realistic to think that one person and one partnership for life can actually meet our modern needs? And I love how we're asking every question, Rosie, like we just expect you to have an answer. Like, yes.
I'm the sage, the wise.
She's got the answer.
The wise sage of relationships. Yes. Oh, I mean, look, relationship therapists and experts do have lots of answers to this too. But I'm kind of using my personal experience and everything I've learned from all these really fascinating people that I've spoken to, and I have amassed some really, really interesting information about how relationships work. And like you say, monogamy is so challenging now, and I did my whole first book all about monogamy, and that was the middle part of my trilogy of comedy shows as well. And I think we've adapted the meaning of monogamy. It came from the Greek originally, monoskamos, meaning one marriage for life, and now we kind of mean one marriage at a time. And we're typically more serially monogamous, and we have different people at different parts of our lives. And indeed, a few people now are starting to become polyamorous and have more than one relationship at the same time, all consensually negotiated and all sort of very ethical. I love the fact that in that community there's a whole new language springing up. Like, if you have reached your threshold of partners, you can say you're polysaturated.
Oh, that's good.
Brilliant.
But I think it's so difficult to find one person to meet all our needs. And in fact, when I was doing that show about monogamy, I found out that 50% of people in many surveys confess to cheating. So I always say to nervous audiences that if you are in a monogamous relationship and you're not cheating, you've got to statistically partner, because the maths is not good on that, is it? Really? I know.
Also, the thing that you said before about the ancient, what was the origin of monogamous? What was
so from the Greek, monoskamos.
So I wonder how many in those, like the women were being monogamous, but the men were fucking around. Surely, come on,
absolutely,
with their togas on.
Yeah, absolutely. All of these structures are patriarchal, aren't they? In our society, it's all about policing and controlling female sexuality. I talk very briefly in my book about how my ideal might be to be a female bonobo, because they have a matriarchal society, and the reason they have a matriarchal society is because they have really ginormous clitorises, and the females really enjoy rubbing them together and having lots of lesbian sex, it sounds much more less physically awkward than human lesbian sex. And so because of that, the women are having such a great time with one another that they form all these bonds and sort of help each other gather fruit and all this kind of stuff. And the male bonobos are just, popping up now and then to go, could we, they're sort of... They're
do we
lesser.
Need men? Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and so they just need them occasionally, to mate or whatever.
Yeah.
But the women or the females in bonobo society have the power, hold the power, because they're having such a great time together. And the men are sort of like, oh, could we have some sex sometimes, please? So we've got to help one another, us women. I mean, we don't have to necessarily sit on a branch rubbing our clitorises together.
Although that's optional.
Summer's coming. We are going to let you go in a minute, Rosie.
We're out of lockdown now, so who knows? We're all going crazy.
Well, a mask, maybe.
All bets are off at this point.
Before you go, can I just share with you, actually, both of you, I have a theory about heterosexual relationships ending. and the difference between men and women in those relationships. So can I just run it past you both and see what you think? Just because so people have disagreed with me. It's just my theory. There's no research into it apart from my own observations.
The best theories.
Yeah, I mean, people have disagreed with me on this, but I am yet to have this theory disproved. So here's my theory. Women are more likely to end a relationship if they're deeply unhappy, whether or not they have someone else waiting. But men will only actually leave when they definitely have another woman waiting in the wings, and even when men insist that there's no one else, if they go, if men leave, you will always discover, perhaps a little bit down the line, but you will always discover that there has been an overlap, and it's yet to be disproved. What do you think? Do you agree with me? Or
Go on, Rosie, you go first. What do you think?
Oh, well, I think women are at that too, because actually my ex had a slight overlap, which I only found out about years later via Facebook, when a sort of timeline of someone's anniversary didn't quite add up.
Oh, my God. Yeah, but I'm not saying that they won't do that, women, but I think men just won't just leave because they're unhappy. I think they've got to have someone ready.
I think you're absolutely right.
Thank
I think
you.
Women... Well, women generally, according to statistics, do end relationships more frequently. 75% of divorces, or around that figure, certainly the last set of figures that I saw, 75% of women initiate divorces in the heterosexual world. And in the gay world, lesbians divorce at several times the rate of gay men. So there are different things you could read into that. I think, yes, women, when they're unhappy, do seem to prefer to call time on a relationship. But yeah, I mean, I've met men who really wanted to still be connected to their partner, but they were kind of being frozen out and shut out. So, there are always different experiences and individual human beings behind the stories and the statistics. So... I've heard of men who felt that maybe their wife had such a close, loving relationship with her best friend or her group of best friends that they felt excluded from that. I don't know. I kind of think thinking pragmatically with my non-monogamy hat on, I think there are lots of people who would class romantic relationships, like the kind of very romantic, loving friendships that women have with one another, as a relationship. So if you were looking at relationships through that lens, in theory, you could say a woman who has a best friend who she tells things she doesn't tell her husband, that kind of thing. You could argue that she has a relationship that is a primary relationship with another woman. And so these things are more complicated. We always define things around sex, and around that seems to be the only form of relationship that we count as an affair or cheating. Whereas maybe you have somebody that you see all the time, you speak to all the time, and you're very much in love with them or have some kind of love connection with them. So I think it's more sophisticated than we might think.
Yeah, it's quite nuanced.
It's nuanced, but I do think you are right to a degree. It does seem to be women who want to end relationships more readily if they're not happy. But then I think at times in my sort of world, I see women sometimes giving up on relationships.
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of men bashing, I think that you are onto something, Louise, because it's sort of like if men are getting their meals cooked for them and getting semi-regular, if resentful, reluctant sex, like it's like, well, but obviously if I'll just stick with this then. Yeah. But for a catalyst to be someone else to come along for them to end it, I think
obviously I know it's not always the case, but
there's anecdotal.
I've been keeping an eye on this situation for some time, and I'm like, and we'll sit back and go, no, nobody else involved, and then exactly like you say, Rosie, then somebody will slip up on social media with
the timeline.
It's always so unbelievable, isn't it? It's like, we just met yesterday and now we're living together. It's like, hang on.
Rosie, can I ask you? Are you still gigging as a comedian? Are you still performing your comedy?
Yeah, although obviously things have been really weird over the lockdown period, but I'm starting to get out and about again now with some live recordings of the Breakup Monologues podcast that are going to be happening at festivals over the summer.
Fabulous.
Just confirmed a date at the Underbelly Festival in London in August. So, and also doing Wimbledon Book Festival and a few other festivals.
And where can people find where you're going to be? Is it a website or follow you?
Well, it's probably best to follow me on social media is the best thing. I'm on Twitter at Rosie Wilby and on Instagram at Breakup Monologues.
Right, brilliant. Well, we'll put links to all that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Rosie. That was really interesting.
It's been a joy to talk to you.
Thank you.
Join in the discussion with us by clicking on the Instagram links in the show notes. You can follow me at Louise Daniels Official.
And me at Amy Cooper Forms. We'll be back in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I don't want to bang on about it, folks, but we're both really keen to get the Instagram swipe up facility, aren't we, Amy? So for which one needs 10,000 followers, and we're both still just sort of hovering around the 1,200 mark. So
I mean, not to be desperate.
No,
but if you can,
fuck's sake, pull your fingers out. Go on, go.